haven't told this story in a long time, but I was thinking about it the other day when I was going through some books on my shelf, and I decided I would like to tell it again. Because if you've stopped by and heard me tell stories before, you will understand that I tell personal stories and family stories. And I came to that because of my love of genealogy, looking at the past and finding the people that have been lost to us. So when I found this story called the Cowtail Switch, it's an African folk tale, it just hit right to my heart, and it hit right to the heart of what I do with storytelling. So I'm going to tell it to you now. Ogalusa was a great African hunter, and he lived in a village in a hut with his 4 sons and his wife. And his wife was now expecting a 5th child. And one morning, Ogalusa got up. It was a good day. He felt strong, and he took the weapons down off the wall and said, "I'm going hunting." And he went. And he didn't come home that night for supper. And he didn't come home the next night, nor the next night, nor the next night. In fact, Ogalusa never came home again. His wife had the baby, a healthy boy, and they called him Puli, was his name. And Puli grew. He was a handsome child. He was a strong, healthy child. And he crawled and he walked and he stood up, and then he began to talk. And you know what the first thing was that he said? He looked at his mother and he said, "Where is my father?" Well, they all looked at each other, those 4 brothers of his, those older brothers. And they nodded and they said, "Yes, where is our father?" Because they had forgotten, and they had stopped looking, and they were no longer asking that question themselves. So the next morning, they got up, and they were big, they were strapping, they were strong, young men now. And they took down their weapons, and they went across the fields and out into the jungle, and they found a path. And they followed that path for 1-2 days until finally they came to a clearing. And in the middle of the clearing was a scattering of bones. And nearby, "These are our father's weapons." And they gathered the weapons up and they stood there and they looked at the pile of bones that had been their father. And the oldest one looked up and he said, "I know the secret of how to put those bones back together." And he began to put the bones back together. And another one said, "I can put skin and sinew and muscles on that bones and start the blood to move in through it." And he did that. And another brother said, "I can breathe life." And he did that. And Ogalusa sat up. And his sons picked up the weapons and they helped their father to his feet. And they walked back to their village. And he went into the house. You can imagine the celebration, the happiness. Here was Puli's father come home. His wife was overjoyed. She began to cook a nice meal. And he stayed in that house for 3 days because that's what people did then when they came back from the land of the dead. And out in the village, everyone waited. And he asked someone, "Please kill a cow and bring me the tail switch. Bring me the tail so that I can make a cowtail switch. And he sat outside his house, out by the door, and he decorated that cowtail. He braided cowrie beads into it, and he attached it to a stick so that it was a switch. And it was beautiful. And people stopped and they admired it. And when he was done, he carried it with him everywhere. To any gathering, anywhere that he had to go in the village, he carried that cowtail switch with him. And people admired it. They wanted one, to tell you the truth, like it. And then one day, they killed another cow and roasted it for a great feast to celebrate the return of Okaloosa. And the night that it was being celebrated, they were all drinking their wine and eating the meat, bread. And people said, we'd like to have that switch. I only have one. And they kept admiring it, and people would make comments about how much they would like to have a switch. And he would say, I only have one. And finally he stood up and he said, I only have this one cowtail switch. And I'm going to give it to the one who did the most to bring me back. Well, at that, those 4 sons, the big sons, the older sons, jumped up and they started to say, I found the path that led us to you. And another one said, but I knew how to put the bones together. I did the most. And another one said, I put the skin and the muscles and started the blood to pumping through his body again. And then the other son said, well, I breathed life into him. I should have it. And the village started to argue about it. It goes to the oldest, the one that put the breath in. No, 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 the one that put the bones back together. Well, they would never have found him if somebody hadn't found the path. And there was a great argument. And Okaloosa stood up again and he said, I know who did the most. And he walked across the clearing until he stood right in front of his youngest son. And he leaned down and he said, Pooley, this switch is for you because you did the most. You asked the question, where is my father? The village made just a loud gasping sound that said they understood. They understood that he was right because they all knew in that village, in that place, they all knew that as long as you tell the story, no man or woman is dead. They are with you still. And that's the story of the Cowtail Switch. And I think of it whenever I'm working on a story or thinking about genealogy, and whenever I say to people, tell your family stories. Tell your family stories. They're your history. You keep those people with you that you loved so much.